Good afternoon, folks. Good morning. Thanks for joining me today on this webinar. And this webinar is really designed if you are new to Capture One and you just want a little bit of help getting started. So if you are a seasoned Capture One user, you might find it a little bit too simple, but hopefully you'll pick up some tricks along the way as well. I am using Capture One 22, which was launched just over a week ago. So that will also give you an opportunity to see a couple of new features as well. So let us get started. Before we do, for those of you on YouTube, you're very welcome to chip in with a comment and question as well. So you can just comment as normal on the live chat, and then myself or Diego, my colleague, will pick that up. If you are in the webinar room itself, feel free to ask a question, and then you'll find the Q&A tab. Just try to separate your questions from the chat, and then it's a little bit easier to find, and one of us will pick that up as well. If you want to have a bit more space on screen, if you're in the webinar room, then you can hit that little down arrow, and then you'll get a bit more real estate for that. Okay, so let us move over to Capture One. So what we're going to do today is keep it nice and simple and really go through a workflow of getting some photos into Capture One, doing a few edits, and obviously doing an export as well. What we are going to start with is really going back to scratch, creating a catalog, a brand new catalog, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute, and as I said, do that first step of importing some photos. I'm going to assume that you have already installed Capture One and you've been through the update wizard or setup wizard, I should say, that allows you to configure a few elements on screen as well. And when we get to that point, we'll talk briefly about customization as well. But with that in mind, let's go back to square one. I'm going to close down this existing Capture One catalog, and we're going to come back to that a bit later, but I want to show you the process of actually making your own catalog. First of all, why do I need a catalog? Why can't I just browse my photos on my system without having to do any of this catalog operation? Well, you can actually do that in Capture One with a different kind of file management called a session, which we're not going to look at today, but you're welcome to look at our other resources to find out more about that. But typically, if you're using a catalog, you'll probably be familiar from that workflow, for example, if you've come from another application like Lightroom. And really the purpose of a catalog is to import the photos that you want. So as I said, a catalog is not a browser. Really, the catalog is a database that knows a couple of things. It knows the location of where your pictures are, the ones that you choose to import into your catalog, very important. So you make a decision of what's in your catalog, and it knows the adjustments on each of those photos as well. And a few other bits that are technical and we don't need to bore you about. There's also a performance reason as well. So if we had to browse a catalog of millions of images just by looking at system information on Windows or OS X, it would be much, much slower. So there's also a performance benefit to using this catalog system. So first of all, we are going to make a brand new catalog up here in the top left, and we're going to call that webinar PM, like so. And all this is making right now is the catalog database. So let's say OK, and then we're going to get a brand new empty catalog open up in Capture One. What does that actually look like? Let's have a look in Finder. We made it in our pictures folder, and there it is, webinar PM. So it's a Capture One catalog. It's very small at the moment because we haven't done anything with it. We haven't imported anything. We haven't made any adjustments. So it's actually pretty lightweight. Before we talk about Capture One's interface, let's get some photos into it, because then it makes more sense to see how everything works if there's actually some pictures in there. Now, hopefully you've spotted this large button in the middle that says import images. That's probably a good place to start. For subsequent imports, and we're going to do one or two, I'm going to import from my hard drive, so an existing location, and I'm also going to import from a memory card, so you can see a couple of variations. Subsequent imports, this button disappears, but the import dialog can be found up in the top left-hand corner. But let's go right ahead and click import images like so. This will open up, let's make that a bit smaller. This will open up a secondary window known as the import dialog. And really what we're doing here is choosing where I'm grabbing my pictures from and how I want to store them. There's a few other options like naming and so on, but we're not going to cover everything today. We're going to keep it nice and simple. So first of all, let's find some pictures to import. So up in the top left, we've got import from and a choose button. So let's go and hit choose. And as I said, I'm going to import some photos from an existing location. So I've got a small external hard drive attached. So I'm going to grab one folder of images that are not too heavy, or there's not too many of them, from my buddy here, Farzan, and we've got a few Fuji GFX files in there. Now, if I wanted to, by holding down my Command key or Alt key, if you are on PC, I can actually pick more than one folder. So notice that it says review for import down here. So if I want to look at a collection of folders together before I import, then I can do so. But we're just going to grab these shots here. So as soon as I say review, that doesn't start, if you like, the import process. That just shows me the contents of that folder, because here I can make a decision, if you like, of do I want to import all those photos? Do I want to skip some that are out of focus or not correctly exposed, as an example? By default, you can see that if I just highlight this, none of the photos are checked. So also just hiding behind my head, let's hide me a second. You can see down here at the bottom, the import button is grayed out because we haven't actually selected anything to import. So a fast way to do it is just say pick all, like so, down at the bottom here. So that selects everything, and you see now everything is ticked on. If I didn't want to import a couple of pictures, I can highlight it and then it unchecks it like so. If I wanted to see my pictures bigger, and we'll look at this in a bit more detail when we import from a card, I can turn on the viewer up here in the top left, and then it makes it easier if I want to decide to reject a picture or pick it. And a really super speedy way to decide whether we want to include a photo or not is just tap your spacebar. So if I tap the spacebar, you can see that selects on and off like so. Oh, I got two selected there, sorry. So let's just one, like so. So simple tap of the spacebar, I can choose to pick or reject. Okay, more on that when we look at the card. When I import from memory card, I should say. The second thing that we just really need to get right is this part. How do we want to handle the import? So by default, it will say this, add to catalog. And what that simply means is that the photos will stay where they are. They don't get moved. They don't get copied. They will stay in that location. Capture One will know how to access them. So again, the database that we created will know exactly where those photos are. Now, when we come to import from memory card, we obviously don't want to leave them on the memory card, so we're going to handle that slightly differently. And as this is kind of a getting started, we're going to keep it nice and simple and leave it at that. There are some other functionality for adding, changing the name, adding some basic metadata, adding, a preset or a style to your photo. So that's all possible as well. Okay, I just saw a question from Noor, actually. Is it possible to have a keyword list to choose from? It's not in the import dialog. You can create a keyword preset, and then you would choose that in the adjustments menu, and then that would add a certain number of keywords, but you don't have access to the keyword list. Let's just check for questions over here as well. I think we are pretty good. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Diego, for handling those chat questions too. All right, so we're going to basically say underneath my head right here, we're going to say import all. So we're going to just grab the whole lot. It's only 10 pictures, so it won't take long. Like so. And then straight away, you're going to see the photos here or over on the right-hand side. Let's just pick one to go in the browser. And you'll see an activity window pop up called generating previews. What does that actually mean? Again, this is another catalog advantage. So to facilitate nice fast browsing between photos, responsiveness of sliders when you make an adjustment, what's happening here is that Capture One is making a small but extremely high quality preview of each photo. Now this is a background task, so you don't have to sit here and wait for that to finish. If you've imported 300 pictures or whatever, then you can go ahead and start browsing immediately. So do not sit and wait for that activity to finish. There is no point. It's just ticking away in the background. So each of these raw files now have a very high quality preview of each one stored in the catalog. So if we go back to this guy, webinar PM, you see it's got a little bit bigger because it now stores some previews. Now, there isn't really anything that you need to particularly consider about previews. The only one thing I would suggest is to go into the preferences, look at image tab, so this one up here, and set your preview size based on the kind of monitor that you are using. So if you're on a big 5K iMac, you would want to boost it up to this. If you're on a 4K screen, you would want to choose this. I have it set to 4K basically because of my secondary monitor, which we're not using right now. We're just looking on a laptop screen. If you're only operating on 2K, then you could drop it down to this, which is the default. Now, the disadvantage of having it too small is that every time I go and choose a different photo, Capture One will then go on and have to read the raw data to show you how it looks on screen. But because my preview is the right size and right quality, as soon as I switch, I get nice super fast browsing and responsiveness of sliders as well, because we don't constantly have to recall that raw data. So that's another catalog advantage. So performance, fast browsing between photos, responsiveness of sliders, and so on. So we did an import. Where are the pictures? So if you remember, I said they're going to stay where they are. So we're not going to move them or anything like that. But how do I access them? How do I browse between different collections once I import more photos into my catalog? So now that we have some photos in the interface, we can talk a little bit more about that. And if we go to the very first tool tab, this one here, this is where we can see what's going on in our photo library. So if you remember, we've done one import so far. If we look at that location in Finder, so that was on this hard drive here. So if we just look at the path, so we've got Traveler, SSD, Capture One Catalog, Demonstration Images, and then FileZan's folder, FileZan, there he is, like so. So Capture One is just showing us the exact path of where those photos are. So what if we import something else? So let's do that, and then we'll talk about the interface. This time, we're going to import from a card. So I'm going to stick the card in the reader. Hope that's the right card. And then immediately, you'll get a view in the Import Images dialog. Now, there's about 800-ish shots on this card. So I've chosen that just to show you the speed of loading, and then you can see how many photos you've got right at the top here. Now, I'm not going to obviously import 805 photos. So let's actually use a couple of the features to make a determination. As this is on a memory card, I might actually want to be able to see, okay, how's the exposure? Is it looking good? In a bit more detail that I can see on a thumbnail. So if we turn on the viewer, I'm going to get a much better impression of how it looks. And also, as I stated, this is again designed for performance. So if I want to use my cursor keys, actually let's turn on the overhead camera. So we're going to hide a bit of the interface here, but you'll see. So if I use my cursor keys, so I'm just tapping right cursor key. Fortunately, this guy is moving around a lot, so you can see how quickly I can browse the contents of the memory card. So the workflow for this would be, let's just go back to the start. So if I tap spacebar on my keyboard, that just tags that as a good shot, or ready for import, selected for import. So I'm just going to pick a couple of others, like so. And you can move through nice and quickly back and forth. So obviously I'm not going to import that one, that's no good. But let's choose that one and the snarly one and one more, like so. So I've just picked 8 photos. As I said, I'm not going to import hundreds on this. Now the crucial difference of importing from a memory card to an existing location is that obviously I don't want to leave the photos on the memory card. I want to get them somewhere safe. So I'm not going to say add to catalog. I'm going to say copy to folder. So this option at the bottom. Capture One's going to say where exactly do you want to copy those. So instead of putting them on the external hard drive, I'm going to put them on the internal hard drive, just really so you can see how that layout's going to look in the folders tool. So let's make a new folder and call that my photo library, like so. And then I'm going to create a further folder called Red Panda, like so. And we're going to choose that as my import folder. So now I can see if we look up here, we can see that's a different location. So they're going to be imported to Red Panda. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually tell Capture One to make a few subfolders for me. You can do some more sophisticated things by asking Capture One to sort it into folders based on capture date and a few other things. So if we look at this little button here, and then I drag up, obviously there's an old format that was in here before. So you see we've got Italy and then the image date. So what we could do in this case is, let's just find something down here. Well, we can help ourselves by saying date and time. That would just reduce the amount of tokens. And all these tokens are doing is pulling out some kind of metadata from the file to create a folder. So if I wanted to do the image date, let's do that. And then this little arrow here, we can then change the date format. So that's going to sort those pictures based on the date that they were actually captured. And you can combine tokens and do a whole load of other stuff, which is kind of out of scope for this, but let's just keep it nice and simple for that. Again, we could do some renaming if we wanted to. We could add some metadata and so on. But again, let's keep it simple. So just down here, you can see the import images button. So let's import those 8 shots like so. So now those pictures are going to come in. The previews are going to be built. Once again, don't sit and wait for that to happen. You can just close that down. And then if you want to look at any particular photo, Capture One will prioritize creating that preview. And there it is. So it's just a very speedy wait. All right, so now we did 2 imports. So how does it look over here? So let's expand out what's going on in this case. So you can see Capture One automatically, let's just get a photo on screen so we're not staring at black. Capture One automatically made that folder for me because these were shot on the 9th of August 2021. And they're shown in this path because they're on my internal hard drive. These shots, they're on my external SSD, like so. So you can, don't have to import always to the same location. A couple of other things that are worth knowing about this tool tab, and then we move on to some of the interface. So at the top under Catalog Collections, these are really just shortcuts. So I can see all photos in my catalog, all images. So this will show me if I just scroll down, Red Pandas, and then Asia as we were before. So this just shows me the entire contents of the catalog, regardless of where it's stored. Underneath, we've got the last 10 imports. So you can see we did 13 shots at this time and date and 8 shots at this time and date. And then we've got the folders tool showing me the exact location of my pictures. Now, if you're on a photo and you're not actually sure where it is, you can right click and say show in library. And then that will show you the exact location where it is, like so, which is really handy if you start getting into user collections, which is a way to make albums, smart albums, projects, groups, and so on. Now that's a bit out of scope, again, for this shorter, simpler demonstration. But if you really want to get into catalog management, there's a whole webinar in this kind of similar style, which talks purely about catalog management. But when I switch to my other catalog, you're going to see a bit more what's going on here. Also, you can tell by the numbers that you'll also see in the parent folders the exact quantity of all pictures in that folder and any subfolders below. So if I had another folder down here with 20 images, I could click on this one and see the contents of both of those. Fairly standard photo library stuff, really. Okay, quick check for questions. Let's see. Can we create custom tokens? No, you can't. To be honest, I'd be surprised if you could think of any others, because if we look at the token list, there's, I think, 60 something in there, which pretty much cover all aspects of the metadata, lots of time and date options, location tokens about where the photo is sitting. None of you will use all of those tokens, and I would be extremely surprised if there was one there that we hadn't thought of. Is it possible to have a default naming subfolder associated with the catalog or session? Well, remember, I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but remember that this is sticky. So if the way I set it up is that I have this folder is, if you like, my master folder, and then the subfolders are always handled by tokens. Or a combination of tokens and text. So I have my top folder, which is my photo library, and then under that I'll have, you know, a location like Italy, for example, as you saw earlier, and a date, and divide it up by that way. So really, the only thing that is kind of dynamic about it is I change the location, and then the date is always gives me something unique as well. So that's how I do it. Alan says, on importing that 8 images from the card, were they copied to the same catalog? Yeah, they were copied to this location and imported into the same catalog, Webinar PM. So whatever catalog you have active at the time is obviously where the imports go. And last question, can you click on more than one folder in the folders tool? No, it's not possible. So you're looking at one folder, but if I was to click on this one, we would see in the browser over here on the right, we would see the total of all the photos underneath that, if you like. Okay, now that we've got some photos in the interface and we've answered some questions, let's just bust a little bit of jargon. So we talked briefly about this area, which are the various different tool tabs. And these divide the tools into, if you like, their different purposes. So exposure-based tools, what we're looking at now. We've got color-based tools with this guy here and so on. So they are split up into categories. So tools in those various different tool tabs. Each tool tab has a scrollable area, so I can scroll up and down, and a fixed area, and you can drag and drop tools in between those tool areas, which are separated by this solid white bar. So that's a hint at some of the customization that you can do as well. In the center, we have the viewer. So that's where we see the currently selected photo from the browser on the right-hand side. Up the top is the toolbar. And in the center are the cursor tools, which change the behavior of the cursor. Now, all of those areas, as you might have seen in the setup wizard, can be positioned in different places and also customized. Now, we won't go heavily into customization, but if we look in the view menu, you'll see each of those elements, not elephants, that I mentioned, have their own customized button like so. So you can have in your own time a look around there and see the customization potential. You also might like to hide and show some of those elements. So you can see here browser Command B, Control B if you're on PC. That will just hide and show the browser. Command T will hide and show the tools. F will give me a nice full screen view, and so on. Now, something that's very useful to do is to hide and show the viewer. Now, if you look in my setup, you see I've got it set to this key, which on my keyboard, if you have a look, is this one below escape. So if I tap this, then it hides and shows my viewer. So that's really handy for looking at a collection and saying, okay, let's look at this shot, double click, and it opens it back up into the viewer. Hide the viewer with the tap, and I'm back to this view. By default, that shortcut is G. So if you want to change the shortcuts, you can do anything you want in the edit keyboard shortcuts menu, which I won't go into, but it's safe to say, you know, any of the myriad of shortcuts that you can see can be customized to your own preference too. Okay, now last bit on customization, the various different tool tabs. If you right click up here, you'll also find some options that you can add any tool to any tool tab. You can make your own custom tool tab. You can delete entire tool tabs if you're never going to use it. As an example, if you never ever or are never going to shoot tethered into Capture One, right click on this camera icon and you might as well remove that entire tab, because if you're not going to shoot tethered, it's just taking up space. If you have customized, I would recommend you then save your workspace up here under Window Workspace. And then that way you can always return to that workspace, or you can make different workspace for different tasks. So you could have a workspace for shooting tethered, if you do that, a workspace for editing, a workspace for selecting, and so on. But just make sure you save them so you can always return to them. Okay, I'm going to shut this catalog down. I'm going to open one that I made earlier. Let's actually show you something. I just want to check a preference. Catalog and session, open a new window. So if I open, file open, a different catalog, let's grab this one. You can see this one is much bigger because it's got 5,000–6,000 photos in it. So it's bigger because of all the previews. So let's say open, that's going to open up this catalog. And a nice advantage of Capture One, you can actually have two catalogs open at the same time. So it's a bit of a nerdy term, but we actually refer to this as the document. So like you would open a document in Word, you're opening a catalog in Word. Often a misunderstanding is that somehow the photos, your photos, are embedded into the Capture One application. That's not the case. You are opening a catalog like you would open a Word document. And I currently happen to have two catalog documents open at the same time, but we only want one. So I'm going to close that down and we're going to focus on this one. So as I said, this catalog has a bunch more photos in it. If we go back to my folders tool, you can see it has just under 6,500. So you'll see there's a lot more folders going on. As an example, if I click on this folder, then we see a whole bunch of headshots. It says 179 because there's some shots in this folder and there's 116 in this folder. So that gives you an idea of how that works. In the user collections, you can see I've made my life easier by organizing my catalog into different categories. So you see I've got a group here called live streams, and then I've got my getting started with Capture One project with a few folders like so, or just this one album like so. And we can populate that as we go so you can see how that works. So the first thing that you might like to do when you're in Capture One is to crop and straighten your photos. And this is where you'll get introduced into cursor tools. So these change the behavior of the cursor. This is also where it's handy if you can learn a few shortcuts. Now, depending how many your brain can hold, depends on the speed that you can move around Capture One. So if you can manage to remember 3, that's going to help you a great deal. So the cursor tool that I tend to stick with by default is this one, the pan cursor tool. Now, if I hover over it, you'll get a description of what that cursor tool does, and also a reminder of what the shortcut key is, which is H. So that's the first one you should try and remember. And what the pan tool does, it allows me to zoom in to 100% and allows me to scan around the photo so I can check for details and so on, if I need to do any healing and cloning, dust bust, etc. So the pan tool is very handy. Double click and we fit back to screen. So H to select that. If you want to crop your photos, then we can use the crop tool here. And if I hover over that, you'll see you'll get a reminder that it's C for crop. So that's the second shortcut that's good to remember. Now, as soon as we select the crop tool, you'll see the boundaries pop up on the corners, and you can't quite see it because it's bright there, but if we go down the bottom you can see this other one. So we can either drag a corner and squeeze the crop in like so, or we can drag a side boundary. So if I wanted to crop tighter, that would be the way to do it. If you want to crop to a particular aspect ratio, good shortcut, just right click or control click, and then the crop submenu will pop up, which you would normally select by long pressing on the crop tool itself, but that's not as efficient. So doing a right click and say you want to crop by 4x5, we could do so, and then the crop tool will snap to 4x5 like so. Or if I want to unconstrain it again, I can choose that once more. If you'd like to rotate, then hover over the corner of your crop area, click drag, and then you can jog the rotation a touch as well. So that's one way to rotate. So right click to change your aspect ratio, hover over the side to rotate. Standard things you'll find in other applications, if you hold down Shift key, then it will lock the aspect ratio where it is. If we hold Option key or Alt, then it will crop about the center like so. So if you've fixed your central position and you just want to squeeze the crop in but lock the center, that's an Option click. Now we spoke briefly about rotation. So there's another way that we can rotate. So let's just select these three pictures. Let's grab one more. Oh, last thing about crop tool. Notice I'm still on my crop cursor tool. So the crop will show in each of the pictures. I could actually crop them independently if I wanted. You don't have to apply the crop if you like. All you need to do is move away from the crop cursor tool. So if I hit the pan tool again, then I'll see the the photo will fit to the viewer. That's the words I'm trying to get out, as it is cropped. If I go back to the crop cursor tool, then you'll see the crop boundaries. Now another way, of course, that you can straighten, it does have a specific rotation and flip tool down here. So if I select these three photos, it's bothering me that there's only three. Let's grab a fourth. Let's just find something up in the A's that we can grab, just as something that isn't a landscape, so it's a bit more of a better test. So let's grab that. So now we've got 4 pictures. Let's select that one too, and I'm going to reset the crop. So you'll see in the rotation and flip tool, if I go on this shot, we've got 1.59 degrees in there, and this one's got 0.23, this one's got 0 because it hasn't been rotated and it's actually quite wonky. So I'm going to reset all of the rotation on those 4 shots, and that little icon there is the reset button. So that's going to reset adjustment for these 4 photos. There we go. So we're back to 0 degrees on each one. So another thing that you can do is auto straighten. So this magic wand button here, that will auto straighten each photo based on a small amount of AI technology. Now, if I click on that, let's see what happens. Then all those photos rotate. Now, like any auto function, nothing is 100% effective, if you like, or has a 100% hit rate. But if you've got 800 pictures that you need to rotate and clean up and straighten, then it's much faster to select all, hit the auto, let Capture One do its work, and then if you need to tweak, a few of them, then you've still saved a bunch of time as well. Okay, so we've done cropping, rotation. Let me just check the notes. So now we can actually talk about some basic adjustments. So let's make sure we can see Capture One. It was just off the edge of the screen there. Let's look at some photos. So let's go to, why not? Let's pick Farzan's again, as they're nice to edit. And if I wanted to move them to a collection that was a bit easier to find, I'm just going to right click here and add myself a new album. Let's call this Farzan, like so. And then I'm going to select all of these and just drag them to this collection. So now I've got nice, easy access. To get deeper into catalog management, as I said, there's a whole webinar on our Learning Hub. We'll drop you a link later to the Learning Hub where you can dig much deeper into, building yourself collections and a catalog that, helps you find photos faster, is nicely organized and so on. Okay, let's edit a photo, and we're going to talk about, let's take this one. We're going to talk about the first steps that you can do in the exposure tool tab. So the exposure tool tab, this one up here, this is where we can deal with things like exposure, contrast, white balance is also there because it tends to be one of the first things that you attempt to do. Clarity, which we'll look at dehazing, vignetting, and so on. So you can do a lot to a photo just by remaining in this tool tab. And that's an important point I'd like to make. Don't feel you have to learn everything in Capture One within your 30-day trial or within 4 months of using it or 6 months or whatever. There's tools in here that I personally never need to use because it's not relevant to the kind of stuff I do. Good example, if you don't shoot tethered, you'll never have to learn anything about tethering. Great, happy days, that saves you a bit of time. So in that customization setup process, you can make Capture One work for you in that respect and remove the tools that you're not going to use. You also, as I said, don't have to use every single tool on every single photo. So we're just going to do a few simple adjustments that demonstrate the impact, if you like, that a few adjustments can make to the photo. Let's try and actually auto rotate this one and see if anything happens. Do we get benefit? There we go, little twist, and that's straightened up nicely. So if I reset that, it's ever so slightly off, auto rotate, and there we go. First tool that you'll find in the exposure tool tab is white balance. Now, this will bring the photo in as shot. So whatever the camera deemed was the correct white balance, if it's on auto or however it was set. So if we want to auto it, we can use the magic wand. So let's just try that. That's did what I hoped it would, which was just to warm it up ever so slightly. Or you can of course drag the sliders manually as well, but auto actually looks pretty good for that. So that's our first job. Oh, we've actually got some adjustments here. Let's reset everything. I did that on purpose because you can see up at the top here, we've got our reset button. So let's reset that back to default. Let's just do my auto rotate again. That's good. And auto white balance, or you can use the gray balance picker there. Like we could pick off this wall as an example. Probably it's too cool up there, but either works. So exposure tool, pretty obvious what's going on here, but there's a couple of sliders that you might presume to do something which they don't. So let's make sure you know exactly how they work. So exposure, you can probably guess, makes the entire photo brighter. And I say the entire photo because it's really shifting all the tones to the right. And when I say to the right, I mean in the histogram up here. So everything is getting brighter. The shadows get brighter, the midtones get brighter, the highlights get brighter, everything gets pushed up, which is great if you have a dark photo. It's the closest thing to changing the exposure on camera itself. So would I brighten this picture? Probably a tiny bit. Contrast, you probably can guess, that's really pinching either ends of the histogram and stretching it out. So the darker stuff gets darker and the brighter stuff gets brighter. So if we drag contrast across, you can see what's happened. I block up my shadows and the highlights get brighter. What I will say about contrast is that if you're used to other applications, you can probably push it harder in Capture One. The color will remain pretty stable, so it won't oversaturate or it won't desaturate if you go in the other direction. So don't think contrast sliders are bad based on your knowledge or use of other applications. Give it a try in Capture One. So I am actually going to add a few points of contrast. Now the interesting one is brightness, because what brightness does is similar to exposure, but it avoids brightening the highlights. So you'll see if we go and do something silly with exposure, you'll see these peaks here, this brighter stuff, which is kind of, the mountain range. You see where I move my cursor, you see that orange line, that's telling me where I am in the tonal range, obviously the bright stuff. So if I do something silly with that, then obviously the bright stuff gets too bright and it's falling off the edge of the histogram. So let's not do that. But what brightness does is that it makes your photo brighter, but it tends to lock to a greater extent the highlights where they are. So if I want to make my photo brighter but not lose important highlight detail like this, or highlight detail up here, then brightness, actually pull the exposure down a bit, brightness is a good friend to have. So I can pull that up, open up the midtones a bit, but not affect my highlights too much. So it's a very, very useful slider. Saturation, you can probably guess, makes stuff more saturated or less saturated. Again, what I will say is that if you already have a very saturated color, so something like this, it will get less treatment than something which is less saturated. So there's a bit of intelligence going on there as well. Oh, I just saw a good question from Laurie. Ding! Any chance we will get a select subject and a select sky in Capture One like there is in Lightroom? Well, you actually have something better than that called the magic brush, which is kind of a bit out of scope for this webinar, but let's say you wanted to select the sky. So I grab my magic brush, this one over here, and then let's just check what tolerance is going on. And then I would do a little brush like that. Oh, my grayscale mask is on, 1 second. Once it's done that, so basically we've now got a mask of the sky, like so. Now we've got a couple of gaps like these clouds, so I can just fill those in. So one there, there we go, sky is masked. So simple as that, Laurie. I would say the limitation of Lightroom's subject and sky is what if you don't have a subject or a sky? And in this case, what is the sky and what is the subject? So it becomes harder then for an algorithm to determine something like in this photo, what's the subject? Is it these people here? Is it the little tuk-tuk or is it the sky? Again, if I wanted to select the sky, so let's display my mask for a minute and then do that. Let it calculate the mask. This is 100 megapixels, so it's obviously got a little bit of number crunching to do. There is my sky selection, like so. If I wanted to select my subject, which could be this dude, so if I just select the tuk-tuk, I can then fill in the gaps, adjust my tolerance a little bit, so to avoid it going in there, and so on. So I believe the magic brush is a lot more versatile than that, Laurie. So that was a slight segue. What we will do in January is actually dive deep into the layer side of things fairly early on in January, and then you can see all the cool stuff about layers. But I believe our magic brush just has more versatility, really, especially when you don't have a well-defined subject and a well-defined sky, and you want to isolate something quickly and easily. Where were we? Oh yeah, so we spoke about exposure. Let's actually give it a bit more saturation. And then now we've got high dynamic range. Again, throw away any preconceived ideas you might have about other applications because these behave in a different way, and I'd actually say a more accurate way. And I'm going to switch to a different photo because there's a good example in this one. So let's just quickly edit this. So we're going to do our rotation, actually 0.4. I'd actually make this a bit stronger. I think I want to push it a bit more. So I find if I want to nudge the rotation a bit, an easy way to do it is to use your cursor keys. So if I tap on up, then that's just jogging it by 0.1 of a degree. If I do shift, whoops, over here. If I do shift and up, then that will give me a 0.1 jog, like so. So I find that easier than dragging a slider or rotating with the crop tool because I can make very small, adjustments quite nicely. So why did I want to show this picture? Oh yeah, high dynamic range. So let's just auto the white balance. I'm going to brighten it a touch, but I don't want to go too bright because you see what happens quite quickly. But I do want to brighten it overall when I use the brightness. And then we've got, a good, almost ready picture. Now, when it comes to high dynamic range, let's drag this tool out. we've got highlights and shadows, whites and blacks. Why do we have 4 of those? Highlights, you can probably guess what happens. If I pull the highlights down, and let's do it dramatically, you can see the sky gets darker, the paving gets darker, because we're bringing back some detail and density into those highlights. And if you watch the histogram, let's pull this down as well. As I pull that down, you can see the brighter stuff up here get pushed over to the left. Same with the shadows. If we open up the shadows, and I'll do, a dramatic adjustment, let's zoom in a bit as well. So if we open up the shadows, you can see the effect that's having, and notice what's going on here. It's pushing that peak down and to the right. So the midtones are kind of growing, if you like, and the shadows are getting pushed into that space. So then you might ask, well, why do we also have white and black? Well, these are the fine versions, to simplify it, of those adjustments. So whereas you saw highlight and shadow had a relatively broad effect, let's look at highlight first. You see it's making the ground a bit darker and the sky darker. When we play with the white slider, see, notice it's a lot more subtle, because it's really only attacking the top, the brightest part. Where it does have a nice effect on this shot is if we look at our backpack, especially if we zoom out, it's a little bit overly bright. It's just distracting down there at the bottom of the frame. But if I pull my highlights down, it's doing a nice job, but it's also making the road darker, which I happen to feel looks all right. But if I pull the whites down, so I can get that back, and it has much less of an effect on the roadway here. So the white slider is super handy. And really the blacks is doing the same thing as that. It's the darkest tones. So if I wanted to use it on this photo as an example, I would say open up my shadows like so, and there's nothing to stop you going negatively with each of those sliders. And you might think it's a bit strange to open up the shadows and then make the blacks darker, but we still have an opening of the shadows effect, but it's not getting unrealistic. And just pulling those blacks down means we keep a nice contrast in the darkest areas. It's very subtle. So if I just do that, if I long press on the name, you can see before and after. And if we open up the shadows, that's before and that's after as well. So long pressing on those names. So those are really useful tools. And as I said, don't tar them with the same brush, if you like, of other applications that you might have used, because they do work in a different way. It's a little bit more subtle. I think the end result is better, and so forth. Okay, any questions? Let me just have a quick check. Nope. I think Diego's mopped them all up, so thanks, Diego. Yeah, so that's good. And thanks, Diego's popped a couple of notes in the chat about the deeper dive into catalog management, because we could talk for an hour about that, and you don't just want to learn about catalogs when you're starting to capture one. Right, last thing to talk about is clarity. Now this shot probably doesn't need it, so let's stick with these. Let's go with this one because it's a bit flat. Let's do a quick edit of this one. So let's reset. Once again, does it need rotating? See, this is one where I would disagree with what the computer says. So I'd probably leave it as is, or just maybe tweak it a tiny bit. So I'm in between what computer says and what 0 is. So I'd probably go something like that. Again, it's a bit cold, so I'd warm that up slightly. And now we definitely are a bit too dark and maybe a bit too flat. So I would open up the shadows. Now we do have potential to do that, but that looks ugly. So we need to keep some kind of realism. Oh, incidentally, what I've been doing subconsciously to reset these sliders is just double click anywhere on the slider bar. So if I double tap, then it takes me back to 0. If we want to reset the entire tool, we can just hit the little reset button here, and that will take us back to 0. So once again, I'll open up the shadows a bit, tiny bit of highlights back in, and pull those blacks down slightly. So what clarity does, and I wouldn't want to add contrast to this picture because it's already relatively contrasty. So it might get a bit too much. So I'm going to reverse what I've done with the shadows. I'm just going to make them darker again, which doesn't make sense. But what clarity does is that it adds a contrast adjustment, but it's really focused in on the midtones, a bit like our brightness slider did. That was lifting the midtones, locking off the highlights where they are. Clarity will add some contrast, but focused only in the midtones. So if I add some clarity here, and let's just bring out the clarity tool so you can see it work at the same time. That's max clarity. So if I ramp that back and forward, you can see that it's getting contrast here, but with comparison to the contrast slider, we're not losing that detail in the shadows. So it's a great way to add a nice bit of depth contrast without messing up your highlights and shadows. I'd probably even open up my shadows and maybe even blacks a little bit more as well and warm up slightly. There's no reason why you can't juggle back and forth between these adjustments. There's no set instructions that says you have to go through these various tools step by step. Even if people on YouTube tell you to, that's definitely not the case. You can juggle back and forth with these adjustments. Is this shot nice and sharp? Yes, it is. So underneath we got something called structure, which is also a clarity adjustment, but it's hyper focused at pixel level. So the end result of that, it increases sharpness or detail. So if you have anything with high levels of detail, let's go back to this scene here, because we've got loads of interesting things on the stools and so on. If we increase structure, especially if we look on these rugs, so before and after, you can see we've got that little extra bit of sharpness and definition. So it's still a clarity adjustment, but hyper focused at pixel level. So hopefully, Michael, preempted your question there. But little warning about structure: if you don't have good data, if I want to be nerdy, in the first place, then piling in structure won't suddenly make your pictures more detailed and sharper. It will probably just increase noise. But it's a great way of enhancing the goodness that's already there. So that's when to use structure. Just be a little bit careful with it, to be honest. Okay. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're nearly out of time. I thought I was being quicker this afternoon compared to this morning, but apparently not. But really, all we need to look at is the basic color editor, and then tell you actually how to export your photos, which is all pretty quick and easy. Before we do that, there's one thing that I wanted to actually do. So I'm going to grab some different pictures, because I nearly forgot about this. Let's move these to a collection. So we do that, and let's just call this headshots. And I just want to grab this set of pictures, like so. Whilst this is here, you can see we've got a 1 and a 2 next to each picture. That's just a different variant of each one. So if you want to experiment with like a black and white version, a color version, or something like that, you can make a new variant, which is a virtual copy. So when you're learning Capture One, that can be quite a nice thing to do. If you want to kind of refer back to the original, or you want to split into color and black and white, as I said, or experiment with different editing styles, variants is a good way to do it. So all you need to do is say new variant, like so, and you'll get another virtual copy. So easy peasy. So I only want to look at the first variant, so I'm going to select all of these, and we're going to collapse them. So we're only going to see the number 1s and 2s and so on. But we should not see 1, 2. Let's collapse that one and that one. So I just want 4 shots the same, and we're going to reset these back to default, like so. So now we've got these 4 pictures that we want to work with. And the reason why I've got 4 the same, if you haven't anticipated it, is what if you do have a sequence of pictures like this and you need to copy, apply the adjustments from one photo to another. So we're going to do that right now. So first of all, I'm going to apply a style to this, which is, just a selection of different adjustments on a bunch of different tools. In Capture One, that's called a style. So there are some built-in styles that you can play with, but I've made a style here, which I'm just going to hover over, and that will preview the style. Click once, and that will apply it to all the photos, like so. Now I want to crop one of them. So let's just choose the crop tool, and we're going to crop a bit tighter, like so. And I want to make a few other additional adjustments. So I feel it's still a bit dark. So let's lift up the brightness and add a bit more contrast, like so, and pull down the highlights. So now I'm happy with that edit, and I want to get those same adjustments across to all the other pictures. Let's go to this tool tab, which you don't really need to look at, to be honest, but it's nice to know it's there and how it works. Let's collapse styles and presets. So we're just looking at the adjustments clipboard. So I want to copy the adjustments to that clipboard and then apply them to the other pictures. So up in the very top right hand corner, you'll find the 2 copy apply buttons. So as soon as I hit copy, watch what happens over on the left. All the current adjustments that are on this photo are copied to the clipboard. Now to get them to the other ones, all I need to do is hit apply, and away we go. So 2 clicks and we're done. That of course also has a shortcut. So if you can remember more than the 2 or 3 shortcuts that we spoke about, C for crop, H for the pan tool, G to hide the viewer, that's the default. I've changed it to that one under the escape key. And then you could probably also manage to squeeze in there the shortcuts for copy and apply. Now the observant people amongst you would have noticed, hang on a minute, why hasn't the crop copied across? By default, that's left off because most workflows which have a heavy amount of copy and applying, the crop tends to be unique. But if you want to enable that, you can do. So in the adjustments clipboard tool, by default, you see it's ticked on with adjusted except composition. If you want to have the crop included when you hit copy, you just need to choose adjusted and that will do everything. There is, however, an easy way to copy one adjustment from one set of photos to another, and that's by using the copy apply button in the tool itself. Now this little button you'll see appear in lots of other tools, so it's exactly the same principle. So if I want to copy the crop across, I can hit copy and apply, like so. If I wanted to make an adjustment, like make it darker, let's go stupid so you can see the difference, I can hit copy and apply, like so. Let's fix that. Copy, oops, that was the magic wand, let's do that. Copy and apply. You get the idea, copy and apply. So the global copy and apply works great for everything, and the little copy and apply in each tool is great if you just want to copy that one particular thing. All right, quick look at the basic color tool, quick look at export, and then we can let you guys go home. So let's go to the color tool tab. Let's go back to a nice colorful shot. Let's find this one as an example. We're in our color tool tab. Let's bring out the color editor, and we're just going to look at the basic tab today. There is an advanced tab and there is one specifically for skin tone, but you can accomplish a lot with the basic tab. The difference with advanced, it gives you the ability to control the color range much closer. It allows you to adjust the saturation range as well. And instead of having 8 picks, as you can see here, or 9, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a full color range, you can have 25. So it's just basic on steroids, if you like. But let's just look at the basic. Couple of different ways we can use this. You can either manually pick the color swatch that you want to edit and then start adjusting. So you can see the reds in the umbrellas just changing. Or if you're not sure which color patch you should be adjusting, if your color vision isn't great or it's kind of a bit of an in-betweeny color, you can grab the picker and say, I want to edit this color here, like so. And then right away, Capture One will say, oh, you want to edit this color patch, and then I can go ahead and adjust like so. So that's the second way. The third way, let's reset that, is to use something called the direct color editor, which just allows you to click on a color and immediately adjust it. So it's super efficient, works very nicely. We're using the same picker down here once again, and we're going to go onto the photo and we're going to click and hold and watch what happens to the cursor when I do that. So if I click and hold, you'll see briefly it changes to a little four-way cursor and then disappears. So I'll do it again, four-way cursor disappears. So that's indicating to me I can drag up and down or left and right. And you'll also see, let's bring this closer. I'm going to click and hold again. If you look at the color swatches, notice that all of them have dimmed out except for two. So another benefit of using this method is that we can edit two color ranges at the same time. So Capture One has deemed that the color that I'm choosing on kind of falls in between those two or covers those two. So this way, when I start editing, let's reset it. It's going to adjust two color patches at the same time, which is more efficient than you manually picking each color patch and messing around in it. So now I've got my four-way cursor up. If I drag to the left, you see it gets darker. If I drag to the right, and I'm dragging with the mouse or pen in this case, oh, you can't quite see it. Hang on. Let's move this up a bit. Where is it? Here. So just about you can see it. So click and hold, drag to the left, see it gets darker. I'm exaggerating so you can see the pen. Drag to the right, it gets brighter. Same would be if you're using a mouse, no different. If I go up and down, then I can increase saturation. If I drag downwards, then I can decrease saturation. Now there's a third axis. How do I access that? Hold down your Alt key, so Option on the keyboard, drag left and right, like so. Then I can change the hue. Now I've actually edited the default slightly, or adjusted the default. So if you look in the, let's just hide that for a second. If you look in the little slider icons here, you can control what each axis does. Now by default, hue is on horizontal, but I like to not mess with the hue when I'm playing with saturation and lightness and trigger the hue with that option click. So that's my personal preference. And you can also make the sensitivity greater, which will means you can make smaller movements with your mouse or pen or larger movements. And that's all there is to it. So if you then wanted to edit this guy, so let's make the sky a bit darker. Let's go over here. Let's make that a bit brighter. And then finally down here, let's bump up the saturation. So you can move over the picture really quickly to make those color edits. So that is the basic color editor. You've also got a color balance tool, which is awesome in there, and a black and white tool as well, which is also awesome. So have an experiment with them too. Okay, before we need to finish, let's have a quick look at export. So let's choose 4 pictures that we want to export. So let's grab 1, 2, let's do a quick open up the shadows on this one a bit, like so. Nice shot. So let's pick 1, 2, 3, and 4, like so, or umbrellas. So I've selected 4 photos that I want to export. If I click on export, this is going to pop open our secondary export dialog. It's going to show me on the right hand side. Let's just hide me for a second. On the right hand side, you can see the pictures that have been selected. And then as before, we've got a viewer, which you can turn on and off if you wish, to see the photo in a bit more detail, which has a really important function. Now over on the left hand side, I'm going to reset this tool so it's back to default. Over on the left hand side, we've got a few additional tools which relate to these export recipes. So all the export recipes are different ways to export your photos. So we've included some examples. You can make your own by hitting the plus button should you wish to. But let's say with these pictures, I want to export these as full-size TIFFs. So I'm going to find that recipe and I'm going to activate it. So by ticking the box here means when I hit export, which is just below me there, export images, it's going to use that export recipe, just that one for now. I first need to choose a location. So let's pick a location and we're going to make a folder called my, whoops, pen's in the way, my exports, and say create, and we're going to choose that folder. Now right away, you can't quite see it. Let's make this bigger. It says catalog default my exports. Now by doing that, I've set up a default location for any export recipe. So if we flick through these other recipes, then you'll see they're all going to end up in the same export location. However, any recipe can have its own unique location. So if you would prefer your Instagram exports to go elsewhere, then you could change it here. So I would just choose a different folder for that specific export recipe. If you want your photos to go alongside the raw files, you can just say same as original file. Okay, so let's export as a TIFF, like so. You can see under format and size exactly how the photo is going to be exported. So it's going to be Adobe RGB, a TIFF at 8-bit, 100%. So let's do that. So let's say export 4 photos. Activity window will pop on my super long activity window. Let's make that smaller with a progress bar. If you have enabled notifications, which I strongly recommend you do, you can't see it, but on my other monitor, there's a little notification that says export completed, 4 images. Do I want to look at them? So if I click show, then immediately they pop up like so, and now I can see those TIFF files. Simple as that. What if we wanted to be a bit smarter, and let's just select those 4 pictures again and say export. And let's say we wanted to have a TIFF, and I also want to have one for Instagram. Now notice that when I went to Instagram, the picture changed in the viewer. Why is that? Because this viewer is showing you exactly what it's going to look like when it's exported. Now it's important for this to be functioning correctly is to have this set to not 200%. Helps if, oh, that's funny. It's my odd display resolution, I think. So let's go to, it's a little interesting thing to report. It's probably because I've changed my screen resolution to be a little bit bigger, so you guys aren't having to squint so much, but ideally you want to set this to 100%. So I'm just going to set it to 200. But what it does mean is that you can see exactly how the photo is going to look on export. So if I go to TIFF, it's going to get much bigger. If I go to Instagram, it's going to get much smaller. Why? Because this particular recipe is going to resize the width to 1080 pixels. So exactly what we want for Instagram as an example. But you can set up any size, scaling, dimensions, and so on the various different recipes. So now I'm going to have 2 export recipes kicking off at the same time. Great. Let's just find that location for a second. It's empty. So let's say export. So activities are going to kick off again. If we look in that particular location, we can see now the JPEGs and TIFFs arriving like so. Now the only annoying thing about this is that they're all kind of jumbled up together, so it's not nicely organized. So let's do one last clever thing, and then that will be the end of our session. So 4 pictures, let's say export. TIFF and a JPEG, let's pop them into a subfolder based on the recipe name. So for the JPEG Instagram optimized, I'm going to use a token like we saw way back at the start for imports. So if I click on this box, I'm going to find a token called recipe name. So let's drag and drop that up in here. So now Capture One will look at the name of the recipe and make a folder based on that name. Let's do the same for the TIFF one. And because I know the token, or I know what token I want to use, I can just start typing. So recipe name, let's choose that one. So now those recipes are always going to use a subfolder additionally based on the name of the recipe. So let's do this one last time and say export 4 pictures. If we go back to that folder, we can now see we've got a JPEG Instagram optimized and a TIFF folder, so they're nicely organized like so. Now that's really just scratching the surface of what's possible in the export dialog. If you want to liberate some more features, you can say show all options down here at the bottom, like so, and that will add a couple of important things like output adjustment. So if we go to the, let's just zoom up. If we go to the Instagram optimized recipe, that will allow us to add some output sharpening for screen, because when we resize a picture, when we make it smaller or larger, there's a negative impact on the sharpness. So this allows us to compensate by adding some extra sharpening, and you'll see, I'll just zoom in a bit more so you can see. As I ramp the sharpening up and down, you can see we can compensate for that. Now on the TIFF output, because it's at 100%, there's no point adding any additional sharpening, so it's turned off in that respect. Then you can add some watermarking as well. There's more metadata controls and so on. So it's just additional options. What you saw with the tokens, again, is just scratching the surface. You can use them to divide your photos up by star rating, color tag, camera type, lens, aperture, camera serial number, all kinds of different ways. But there's also an entire webinar on that as well, and plenty of tutorials. So there we go. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a kickstart to Capture One. Sorry we overran by a little bit. Again, I thought I was quicker this afternoon than this morning, but obviously not. Just to close off, I would say don't, again, feel you have to learn everything if you're in your trial or you're 60 days into ownership or something like that. Use the tools that are applicable to you. Don't feel you have to learn everything. Start off slowly and build up as you go through. But you can accomplish a great deal just by working in the exposure and color tool tabs. Even if you limited yourself to the exposure tool tab and said, I'm only going to use white balance, exposure, high dynamic range and clarity, you can still make a big impact to your pictures as well. So don't be hard on yourself and keep it nice and simple. Last couple of questions. RT, you're lucky because it was the last one that just came. Is it fully optimized for the M1 chip? Yes, it is. It was fully optimized from Capture One 21 some time ago, so absolutely. It's a universal application, so it's just one download. In terms of performance, so you've been watching on a MacBook Pro Intel, so you can see it here, this guy. So a 2019 16-inch. I also have a 13-inch MacBook Pro M1, which is just out of shot and I can't reach it, otherwise I'd show it to you, which is the baby, the 13-inch MacBook Pro. It easily equals the performance of this machine, if not exceeds it. So if you're on the fence about M1 technology, I would say don't be. It's a huge step in performance, battery life, heat dissipation, all that kind of stuff. Last couple of questions from over here, if I've missed anything. Let's see, that's all answered. Can all options be added to a recipe? Yeah, you can add or remove as many or little options as you like. So they're just hidden basically by saying show all options. But if you want to add a watermark, excuse me, losing my voice, resize it, sharpen it, etc. Yes, all options can be added to any recipe, absolutely. And just, I think that's pretty good for the questions. Yep, Diego's answered a bunch as well, so we are in good hands. For more resources, learn.captureone.com. Our YouTube channel, I will need to press my YouTuber subscribe button, so don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, this one here, because purely that means whenever we go live, you'll get a notification, I think half an hour before and at the time that we go live as well, because we often do shorter impromptu live sessions on a Tuesday, which are about one specific thing, and 20 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes. So if you can't bear to listen for an hour, and I don't blame you, that's a shorter way to get into some tips as well. And you'll always find the recordings on the YouTube channel too. So thanks again for joining me. I hope that was useful, and enjoy the rest of your week and the weekend when it comes. So take care and see you soon. Bye now.